Good evening and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host, Kilu Nyasha, and board hopping is Jackie Perez. And my guests today, I'm happy to and delighted to say, are Tina Bartolome and Timothy Huey. And Tim is with Asians for Black Lives, and Tina is with Soul, and I'm going to share with you their bios. But I just wanted to let you know before I share their bios that this program is going to focus on police murders and brutality, as well as the organizations that are trying to resist this latest trying to resist fascism. So without further ado, I want to first introduce Tim Huey. Tim grew up in the Bay Area suburb of Walnut Creek and has lived in Oakland for the past 4 years. His grandparents are immigrants from China, and his parents were born and raised in San Francisco. He attended St. Mary's College of California, where he majored in communication with a minor in ethnic studies. He has worked in a variety of nonprofit settings, including a Korean American immigrant rights organization in Washington, D.C., Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus in San Francisco as a community advocate and civil rights educator, and doing fundraising for an Oakland youth development organization. A strong believer in equity and social justice, Tim has been active in organizing communities of color around a variety of issues and engaging in both political demonstrations and direct action. As a member of Asians for Black Lives, A4BL, he has strived to shed light on the systematic oppression of Black people, engaged with others about the connections, intersections, and need for solidarity between the Black and Asian American communities. And I'm so pleased to hear that. And now I want to go to Tina, and I'll share with you her bio, but before I do that, I just have to say that this gal has been one of my very dearest friends, and probably the best friend I have when it comes to coming to my rescue. Thank you. And also bringing color into my life. This is one of her first gifts of color. Tina Bartolome, Program Director of Soul, School of Unity and Liberation of Oakland, was born and raised in San Francisco, the daughter of working-class immigrants from the Philippines and Switzerland. Sometime in the 1990s, between unlearning the 500-year lie of Columbus discovering America, getting evicted, and fighting propositions to try 14-year-olds as adults, Tina joined the movement and never looked back. Beginning with the youth group Underground Railroad for the past 20 years. Tina has worked as a popular educator and community organizer committed to continuing the legacies of Yuri Kochiyama and Ella Baker to rise up and fight for liberation. For the past 5 years, she has been program director of Soul, starting in 1996 as a summer training program inspired by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's Freedom Summer. That's SNCC for those who are more familiar with the acronym. It has since grown into a national community organizing and political education training center. Soul prioritizes building the capacity of working class communities of color, especially young people and women, to effectively lead today's movements for liberation. Welcome, Tina and Tim. It's so good to have you here. And then I just have to say a few brief words about our third guest who couldn't be here because she is at a demonstration, a protest against these latest murders in Oakland. It's going on, that begins at 6, and she couldn't do both. So Nikita Mitchell is with Black Lives Matter as well as Soul, and a graduate of the School of Unity. So we'll miss her, but unfortunately she couldn't be in two places at one time. So without further ado, we'll go straight to Tim. Tim, talk to us about the some of the latest police murders that have gone down?
Well, we've hopefully, at the very least, if the mainstream media is doing even a half-decent job, heard the names Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, both murdered in the last 3 days by policemen while trying to comply with orders from the police that came in basically shouting orders, trying to not de-escalate, but escalate things. And so I definitely know Philando Castile was murdered in St. Paul, Minnesota. And that strikes a chord with me because I do know several folks from the Twin Cities, including several Asian American activists and artists that have organized around several police cases of murdering people of color, including Asian Americans. And so that definitely strikes a chord because they are certainly activated at this point around this issue, as we are here in the Bay Area. So yeah, it's one of those. I mean, I've been on my computer and my phone for the last couple of days, just in some sense, just not again, and just putting out really the same stuff. The Black Lives Matter, stop killing black people, and like, why is it that we jump to character assassination of those that are murdered when they happen to have a little bit more melanin than other folks? And so, at this point, I actually put something up on Facebook where I was like, can somebody just post 20 pictures of cute dogs and puppies and kids? Because I'm tired, and I know everybody is, and I know we got to keep pushing forward, but right now I am just tired of having these conversations, of having to talk about this, and so we all need to take care of ourselves. And I think that's one thing to remind ourselves of is, in order to keep pushing, we need to take care of ourselves and each other. So I think that's one thing that's going to be very important in the next few weeks, months.
That is so true. Yes. And one of the things I really wanted to emphasize today is that the Washington Post, I mean, this is really exciting. Mm-hmm. Today, I mean, I felt like my mojo was working or something, because I'm doing this program that's going to focus on police murders, and the Washington Post printed an expose, and it says the Post is documenting only those shootings in which a police officer in the line of duty shoots and kills a civilian. The circumstances that most closely parallel the 2014 killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, which began the protest movement culminating in Black Lives Matter and an increased focus on police accountability nationwide. The Washington Post is compiling a database of every fatal shooting in the United States by a police officer in the line of duty since January 1, 2015. And so far, they've learned that nearly 1,000 people were fatally shot by the police, more than twice the average annual number reported by the FBI in previous years. Okay? So, and they also, you should go to the Washington Post today, and it's online, because they have printed a website, which unfortunately didn't print out, that you can go to send them information, because they're going to continue to collect and monitor all these police killings, which is really exciting news. Tina.
Yes. I mean, I think part of just kind of building off what Tim was saying, and I think we're talking about this is a long-term struggle we're a part of, and as much as it's obvious and the brutality is exposed and it's obvious that it's racist and that the system is rotten at the core, there is both like, how do we think of this fight in terms of long-term and short-term? And that knowing that even the knowledge that all these things are wrong isn't enough, right, to make the change, right?
Yeah, we know what the problem is.
Yes.
But what's the solution?
Yes. And I think we're in a moment where the killings are relentless. They're over and over and over again. And we show up and we take the streets and we demand justice. We demand reparations. We demand data gets released so that we actually can prove that it's racialized, the profiling and the murders. We have to wage campaigns even just to get the data.
Right.
And so there's these short-term, it's necessary, right, to have short-term like demands. but we also know that the long-term vision is actually we want a different system. We actually don't want police. We don't need police to feel safe. Actually, they make our communities feel unsafe. So how do we, as organizers, as activists, as educators, how do we both like ground ourselves in the current fight and pace ourselves for the long haul? And you know, I think
because it is a protracted
struggle.
And
that's why I think like we have the benefit of being in your presence, because you're a long-term marathon runner. You know, you've been with us for decades, and you have that long-sighted vision that I think some of the younger generation, I think, needs to hear and needs to have. It's getting politicized in this moment. A lot of young folks have been politicized by taking the streets because of the rage, in response. But haven't necessarily been grounded in the history that has come before and the legacy of struggle of the Panthers, of so many that have been struggling for decades and could learn from that wisdom. So part of, what I bring to the table as part of Soul is we are a training center, and I think part of what we're dedicated to is bringing that history to young people that are getting politicized, as well as the skills, nuts and bolts skills of organizing. If we're going to try and wage campaigns to demand justice, what is a campaign? How do you wage one? How do you develop demands?
Exactly.
How do you make sure those demands are actually grounded in what everyday people want and not what some academic says is important, know? So I think that's part of what Soul is trying to contribute. Is we're a training center. We're not on the front lines running the campaigns. We just want to hold a space, especially for new organizers who have a fire, who are just joining organizations but haven't necessarily gotten trained up in how to do organizing.
Right, and Jackie is flashing some of the pictures of political ed classes that when you brought the class to my house, which I'm always delighted to talk to young people. I love sharing our history. Most of the young people are always interested in the Panther experience.
Yes.
And of course, we're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the party. However, I must say that the tactics that we used at the time would not be appropriate today.
Right.
Please.
Right.
The firepower that these guys have today is just it's heavy duty. It's military. It's we can't confront them militarily, but we can stop buying their stuff. We can stop voting for their creeps. We can say no, 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 no. As consumers, as workers, as taxpayers, we can say no, individually and collectively. And I've been saying no for a very long time, and I've suffered the consequences. And there are consequences to saying no, okay? But one of the things I don't regret is that I hardly shop anywhere anymore because, once I saw the level of depravity in Bangladesh, where one of the sweatshops burned to the ground and 1,000 people were murdered, and all the labels in there, every label that came out of that fire, I have boycotted. Okay, and I won't mention them because I don't want to advertise them. And we can individually say no. We don't have to buy their stuff. And I think we should take to the streets and vote with our feet instead of the evil lessers come election day. And even, and I'm very pleased to say that, what's his name, Chris Hedges, who was bureau chief of the New York Times, visited Mumia this week, or last week rather, and gave a full report, quoted him, and I'm like, wow, okay? So a lot of people in the establishment now are really speaking up and stepping to the plate and saying, no, this is too much. You've gone too far. This is too fascist.
Right.
Yep.
So there's a lot of hope, you know, in that respect. So let's learn a little bit about more about Black Lives Matter. I know it got started in behind the Michael Brown assassination, really, and
I thought it was after Trayvon Martin that Opal and
no, it was 2014, I think, pretty.
And that's where, I mean, it took off. Well, I mean, no need to quibble over those specific details, but I had thought I'd heard that Eliza and Opal and
Well, perhaps it did.
Started using that phrase after Trayvon Martin, and that it really took off.
Oh, okay.
That was my understanding.
Okay, you
but yeah.
probably
In
know
any
better
case,
than I,
in any
'cause
case,
I'm-
it is
yeah, you're
it is
more
here
actively
now, and it
involved.
is making its presence felt.
Yes,
As
yes.
a collective,
So that
yes.
would still make it a few years old.
Yes,
now, about
absolutely. Yeah,
2
it's
or
not
3
some
years
flash in the
old.
pan. Mhm.
Right. So some people would say, well, why Black Lives Matter? You know, doesn't that promote more division and more racism? Shouldn't we say human lives matter or all lives matter? What do you say to that?
I mean, yes, you can say. I mean, if the long answer is yes, you can say all lives matter, but from a kind of diagramming it out thing, if white lives matter, and we know they do, Asian lives matter, and we know they do, and then you look at the outcomes of brown lives and black lives, and they're lower than other racial groups, then really, if the bare minimum is that they all get that certain level that's called mattering, then do Black Lives Matter? And it's been said, you know, it's simply by saying the phrase Black Lives Matter, it does not mean that other lives don't. It doesn't mean my life doesn't matter. But we are emphasizing that Black Lives Matter because right now they don't. And so, got to highlight that, push that. Obviously, it's, to a certain extent, worked because it's all over the news right now that 2 black men have been killed by police. That wasn't necessarily going to happen 5, 10, 15, 20. I mean,
Right.
it was viewed in a very different light about 100 years ago. So, yeah, this is slow progress. We'd like it to speed up. But yes, Black Lives Matter has made an impact by highlighting this issue, whether it's a black man, black woman, black trans person, that their lives matter, and that the state, the government, the justice system needs to treat it as such, and the media as well.
Right. And for example, this woman who was the proverbial straw that got the San Francisco police chief fired, Jessica Nelson Williams, you can't even imagine a white pregnant mother of 4 sitting in a car and driving off and being chased and shot dead by a police officer. You can't imagine that. But a black woman in a car, being shot to death. I mean, wow. 4 months pregnant. I mean, I don't know if she was 4 months pregnant. I'm sorry, but she was pregnant with and
I mean,
I have trouble talking about it.
Yeah.
You could argue that Chief Sir would still have his job if it weren't for Black Lives Matter building that momentum.
Right,
that
because of the
says
Frisco
her life
5 that we had
matters.
on this
Yes.
program right here.
Edmund, yeah.
Yes, and
Crypto.
the Washington Post printed their picture in this article
yeah.
as well and brought attention to that. So I'm like, whoa,
Yeah.
that's a mainstream newspaper. So, Jackie, will you show those photos that came from the article? Yeah. Look, now there's the vision. Those are the lives that have been taken very recently, and you can recognize some of them from that you've already seen, and some of them are missing. I mean, a lot of them are missing, of course, because 1,000 were killed last year, and oh, by the way, 509 in the first 6 months of this year, according to the Washington Post. So that's just ridiculous. Look at that. On and on.
Yep.
So I think it automatically goes without saying that all lives matter, of course. But the problem is that black lives have never mattered in this country. not from the jump street when we were dragged over here from Africa, most of us, not all. But, and my family, for example, I come from a long line of women who were born into West Virginia slavery. And, my great aunt talked about her great-grandparents who escaped slavery. So we have a long history of enslavement, and now incarcerated with this mass incarceration is the new slavery.
Cheap labor.
Yeah.
Cheap prison labor.
And it's worse in many ways than chattel slavery. And and also there are more black men incarcerated now, enslaved behind walls, than there were in chattel slavery. So, there's a couple of million in prison, and there's always another 7 million or so outside on some other form of penal control. So we have and then the fact that black people's statistically and economically are always at the bottom of the totem pole, and here we have. What does that say? Does that say Black Lives Matter in America? I don't think so. So I think that you are absolutely right, Tina and Tim, to support Black Lives Mattering. And I hope that this program and your presence will encourage many more people of different ethnicities, because there's only one race, the human race, to join with us and say, yes, Black Lives Matter. And to me, that's the best way of standing up and saying I'm not a racist.
Yeah, I think part of what the power of Black Lives Matter, and I think, the other comparison I would say is like the phrase like the 1% versus the 99%. There's certain phrases that I think come out of crisis that really resonate with a lot of people, because it's just a simple way of like putting out the power dynamic that exists in this country. And having to say, even in the first place, and demand that Black Lives Matter is itself like just a call for dignity, right?
Exactly.
And just being able to point out that 1%, versus 99%, again, is something everyone is like, yes, we understand this. We understand that power exists like this, and it's being put into words. Now, what's that next step to taking it out to the streets, to having demands? And I feel like the past 3 years or so, there's been in the national consciousness more of a willingness of everyday people to show up and not necessarily know what's going to happen when you show up in the street, but to know that it's necessary to show up.
Exactly.
And that's where I think it's important for those of us that have been trained as organizers, that are activists, that have been doing this work, to build organizations for those folks to join, because we know that collective power is going to be, that is what we have. We don't have the money. We don't have control of mainstream media. We have numbers, right? We have rage. We have our understanding of what justice is, and we have the ability to show up. Yes, so I think that's part of why it's so important that people join organizations that are willing to stand up and take sides as fascism comes to the rise, as mainstream media tries to kind of flip what the story is of what's really happening, that you have organizations that people can show up to, find their political homes, find ways to take action and be in solidarity and community that's not just on Facebook, but that's that we are actually showing up and we're actually using our numbers. And sometimes it means shutting things down, right? Sometimes it means shutting down the BART system, because we're not going to let business as usual when someone has been killed by police and is getting away with it. Sometimes it means, shutting down other daily things, like because we have demands that are not being met. And I think this is what our challenge is in our generation, is how are we going to use our imaginations to we know what we're against and what are we for, So I think that's kind of always where the tension is trying to figure out.
Yeah, well,
how-
we can occupy spaces.
Yes.
One of the things that I've been advocating, that for decades I've been advocating that we boycott these elections and these selections. And so one year, many years ago, some KPFA colleagues and myself, we went and decided we were going to make big signs and go pick at the polls. And that was our theme, pick at the polls. And so we go marching down to the local poll station with our signs, and they told us, no, you have to be 3 blocks away. I said, at least. And I said, oh. So I thought about that, and I said, well, we could take it to the streets on Election Day, and those who want to do civil demonstrations, CDs, can pick at the polls and get arrested. And then maybe that would send a signal to the whole world that the American people are no longer supporting this undemocratic selection, big money game that's played on us every 4 years, and every 4 years we're asked to vote for the lesser evils. Well, evil is so evil this year. I don't have to describe it.
Two
I don't
sides of
even
the
want to
same coin.
mention the candidates' names. They are so evil. So I think that the only way to protest evil is to not support it. How can you be for somebody you're not for?
Yeah. No,
You
I mean,
see?
I would love to see the day where our movements are so strong, where that type of tactic was actually going to like carry some weight. I feel like we're too small right now. I feel like the left is too small for that
But
to actually work.
My argument would be to come back with Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, quote, that indeed movements are always led by a minority, a small minority
For sure.
of activisms,
For sure.
activists. So our active movement is small.
Yes.
But the people are large. They're huge majorities all over this country of color. Because they've been labeling us minorities, majority of minorities. That's nonsense. We are the majority if you combine us, people of
I mean,
color.
they can't ignore that. Within
Yeah,
30
and
years,
not
it's
only
going to
that,
be.
the
They
whole-
can't even use the term minority anymore, even like technically speaking.
No, it's stupid to begin with. It means less than, and we should stop calling ourselves that. We are the majority, just as the South Africans were the majority under apartheid. It's the same here. We have a small white supremacist ruling class, and we have and a buffer of brainwashed white racist working class that provides the buffer to the ruling class. However, we are still the overwhelming majority, and we are the oppressed majority, and we should be fighting back. If the small active minority, active group moves, right? The vanguard, and I'm not scared to say the word, the vanguard of the movement, those who are most progressive, move. In other words, get out front and pull. I think that we have the power of the people. We just have to unite it. And I also think that young people, what you just said is so true. We all need organization. Whatever organizations are local, join them if they're progressive or better yet, revolutionary. However, we need an umbrella. In South Africa, they finally brought all the groups together under the umbrella of the United Democratic Front. We need that here. That's something that people can start thinking about, uniting, and coming up with a. Back in the 60s, we called it the United Front Against Fascism. We could use that name again, whatever. But you young people, you're the ones who have the creative juices, and you can come up with. I'm sure you can come up with some incredible solutions in terms of unifying.
And that is the challenge right now.
That's the challenge.
As Tina put, like there is a minority of us that would be willing to do things that could move towards boycotting elections. But we have the numbers. Like you said, we have the numbers. It's a question of convincing them that that's the right tactic to take. And when you're talking about the large majority of people, they've been brainwashed for a long time that elections is the way to make change. And so it's gonna be more than a 4-year cycle of us doing something to convince them to boycott elections that it's gonna happen. I mean, to turn it back towards Asians for Black Lives, our parents and grandparents are the ones that fled words like revolution and, you know, socialism and things like that. So even though it's completely different context, even though it's basically being used as a scare tactic by the political mainstream to keep people voting for democracy and for, you know, you have a voice, it's going to take a much longer haul, longer trainings and education, and just a shift for that majority to decide to follow that minority that says we are going to boycott elections. We are going to,
How do you know that?
disengage the system.
How do you know that?
Which part?
That it's going to take much longer. It can't happen now.
Based on both history, there's very little history that rapidly changes in a social movement like that without some catastrophic catalyst. Whether it's something like 9/11, which brought even further police state and Big Brother, or things like the Vietnam War, where all of a sudden sons were being shipped off to Vietnam. Yeah, please.
I think too, to me, part of what the formula of a tactic like boycotting elections would also require is putting forth an alternative. So we want you to boycott this, and we're instead going to build this, or and we have people invested in that vision and want to show up for something. And so being against elections, but at the same time being willing to show up for something else. And I think that thing is part of what the work is that we have cut out in terms of developing unity around a vision, if that makes sense. And that, I think that is something that can take time. I think part of what is promising right now and what we're experimenting and like doing our best, and I think sometimes doing great and sometimes making mistakes and trying to learn from them, is trying to practice what solidarity looks like in 2016 and 2015 and 2014, since, for the example of Asians for Black Lives, what does it mean for Black communities to put out a call and say, Black Lives Matter, who's going to show up for us right now? We're being killed. And that, a group like Asians for Black Lives is an attempt, and like a genuine attempt, to say, we're going to come together as Asian people in this country to show up for Black lives and to stand side by side on the front lines and put our bodies on the line. And as a way to try to figure out, I think, you brought up the 60s and 70s, and that there's lessons there, but it's also going to look different today.
Oh, of course.
So I think we're trying to figure it out, right?
Trying to use that creativity.
And like showing up, and part of it is, now it's been a good couple years of showing up, and a lot of it has been for direct action. And I think building trust. Just building trust between Black and Asian communities takes time.
What about the Latino community and the Caucasian community?
Yeah, so I don't think we can speak for them, because
but those groups do exist.
Totally.
That organize around this.
There are groups now?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Well, tell our viewers about them.
Well, there's here locally in the Bay Area, there's the Bay Area Solidarity Action Team. BASAT, and they are not completely, but mostly white folks, white activists, that have actually a lot of capacity to pull off direct actions. And whether it's like they have the equipment to climb the flagpoles, or they have a lot of knowledge and experience to support actions.
I think what I was asking, are there any other groups that are basically piggybacking on the same idea of Black Lives Mattering? In other words, is there a group called Latinos for Black Lives for Black Lives, or
I would say that BASAT is that group, one of those groups for for white folk as far as, I mean, they don't use the
They
term
don't use the term.
Black Lives in their name, but they certainly hold it within their principles.
There's another
it's centered
group
there.
called Standing Up for Racial Justice, Surge. I can't remember where they're based, but it's not local. And they're also another organization that's meant to be for white folks that want to show up for racial justice. I'm sure there's other groups locally, I mean, not locally, but in other locales that are using Black Lives, showing up for Black Lives. But I think here in the Bay, Asians for Black Lives is really the only one I can think of that's like blank for Black Lives.
I
That's a
see.
term.
Yeah, well, I really like that.
Yeah.
Because it just says it right away. It hits you and it says, oh, you know, okay, it's not just black folks saying Black Lives Matter. And that's very important. And one of the things that I really am concerned about is, I lost my train of thought.
Well-
Leadership.
Okay. Well, okay.
Leadership. We, in the past, I think one of the problems with our movements in the past is that we've kind of all been oriented, or I hesitate to use the word brainwashed, but for this, but we've been heavily influenced, let's put it that way,
Socialized,
with the idea of the Messiah, the one great
One charismatic leader, yeah.
one wonderful, you know. And we've had some wonderful charismatic leaders, and we know that they've been assassinated. And, you know, Malcolm X and Dr. King come right to mind, among many others who have been just taken away as soon as they become effective. So, you know, cut off the head, the body dies is the idea behind that. So, in terms of movement leadership these days, I've noticed that, like the Occupy movement and other movements have disdained having one charismatic leader, and I think that's a good thing. So, what are the kinds of leadership that you envision?
All I can say as far as our practices, Asian for Black Lives has made a point of trying to, I don't know if rotate is the right word, but basically build leadership amongst all of our members, whether it means it's something as simple as co-facilitating meetings, and so that rotates. So one person does,
like
they do
that.
two.
I like
Each
that.
person volunteers to do two. So you've got one
Yes.
person that already did the last one, along with somebody who's new,
Rotating
and just
leadership,
rotating it.
chairmanship.
And I mean, that's really how I kind of started stepping up within Asian for Black Lives. Was I said, sure, I'll help so and so facilitate the next meeting, and then facilitate the one after that with somebody else new. And so that really is one example of building leadership. And I know right now a lot of it, the challenge is that we're building all of our skills, whether it's as security teams for actions or medics or things like that, or direct being there. The challenge has been spreading out the relationships, because a lot of it is, I mean, one of our principles is deferring to black leadership, whether that's Black Lives Matters, Black Seed, Onyx, etc. And so, but a lot of certain folks within our group know more people in those groups, have built personal relationships. So that's one of our kind of continuing goals now, is to build those relationships with all our membership and black leadership, so that when it comes time to, you know, check in with somebody, it doesn't have to be the same person every time that's saying, hey, what do you guys think about this? How do you want us to step up?
Gotcha.
I think I can speak from the Soul perspective, because we are focused on community organizing, and within that, I think leadership actually means something very specific. When you're talking about, you know, organizing is fundamentally about having the people most directly impacted by an issue being the ones to demand change around that,
Exactly.
their conditions.
Right.
So the process of joining an organization, what we would call base building, the process of base building, you bring someone in who is being impacted by housing and eviction, and how do you fight for housing rights as someone who has been impacted by homelessness, or someone who has lost their housing. How do you go through a process to build up your leadership and be able to transform your own understanding of what's possible as an individual when you join an organization, right? And there's a whole science to what it means to develop leaders from those that are most impacted. And that's what makes me think of Ella Baker,
Right.
actually,
Yeah.
and why.
And she was the leader of SNCC. the
Yeah,
Student
and
Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
and her, I'm no expert on Ella Baker, but and I'm gonna paraphrase her probably badly, but one of the things I love about her is her definition of a leader is someone who has the ability to develop other leaders.
All right.
And that to me is the measurement of a leader. Is that you're not just the figurehead, you actually are investing in developing other leaders. And just thinking about how that's sustainable, right? That's creating movements where it's not just about one person. It's actually like raising each other up.
Right.
And it's a way, I think when we first do trainings around leadership development, we often have to like shift the framework, because you think of leader, you think of an elected official, you think of someone that you see speaking in front of the microphone all the time. And we actually do a lot to dispel or at least broaden the understanding of leaders. A leader can be people that are behind the scenes. In fact, it most often is. A leader can be someone facilitating a meeting that actually doesn't talk that much, but has created the space for others to talk, right? So leadership does not always look like you're talking the most and you're saying the smartest things. And that creates a ton of room for all different types of leadership.
A leader is not a star or a celebrity.
Yes. It can be, and it has to be so many other things.
Yeah, exactly.
And it has to, I think the definition of leadership needs to include a process to support people who are directly impacted to engage in changing their own conditions with others, right? And that transforms you, and then you win things, right? You
dare to struggle,
dare to struggle,
win.
dare to win.
Yes.
And I think that's part of why looking to history, looking to people like Ella Baker, who turned that process of developing leaders into a science, into an art, and looking at the legacy she left behind for how do we develop leaders today, I think is important.
Right. Yeah, wonderful example. Yeah.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit more about Solon, the processes.
Yeah,
You've been all over the place. You've been to Pittsburgh, you've been to New York, you've been in different parts of the country. When you brought kids to my house, they were from all over the country. And
So yeah, I think what we're up to is trying to develop the capacity of working class communities and communities of color, of especially young women, young people from those communities to organize. And when we say organize, we mean building up the power of organizations and individuals to be able to fight and win immediate improvements
right.
in people's lives. People don't fight for ideas, they fight for changed, a quality of life, right?
Right.
But then also to fight for changing the relations of power in this country, right? So we're trying to, when someone comes to a training and they want to become an organizer, part of it is just the nuts and bolts of like, how do you develop a campaign? How do you do outreach? How do you recruit people to join your fight? As well as like, how do we understand the systems of oppression that exist in this country and creating these conditions in the first place? Because we're not just trying to win reforms, right? We're trying to win a long-term systemic change. So part of what our trainings do is try to impart those basic hard skills. Literally, how do you do cold outreach, on the bus? If you're trying to fight for transit justice, how do you talk to someone and find out what's going on with them and then see what their issues are and then get them to come to a meeting or turn out to a rally, right? Because we're building people power.
Exactly.
But knowing that we're trying to connect the dots at the same time and say, there's no buses running in your neighborhood after 8 o'clock because you live in a poor neighborhood and they don't care about how you get home, right? They're just going to cut the bus line because they're doing budget cuts and neoliberalism is the order of the day in this city now, right? How do you connect that to the fact that there's also a power plant in your neighborhood, right? And that's environmental racism. So we start to connect that it's not just this one issue that you're facing. It's like there's all these things that are connected. And then who's benefiting actually from all these horrible conditions? It's often the same corporations. It's often the same officials that are supporting these corporations. So I think in our trainings, we're just trying to create space for people to think about what do I experience in my daily life? How am I being impacted? How do I connect that to these bigger picture, this larger system? And then how do I join up with other people and other efforts that are trying to fight and demand justice?
Right.
So, I mean, I think that's kind of what we're up to in like a bigger way. And hopefully through coming through the trainings, you're getting elements of that. And we've seen that kind of across the country. There are really, really exciting and important gains being made and led by young people across the country, especially around education justice.
Good.
You
What
know,
are some of the some particular successes?
yeah, I mean, I think like in LA in particular, there's been some wins around changing school discipline policies, right? So we know
Right.
about the schools to prisons pipeline. So people of color, working class youth of color get tracked very early on, and get on a track to, they get marked up for suspension, they get detention,
Or beat up by a police officer.
beat up by a
and they
police
put right in the
officer. They
classroom.
all of a sudden get have a record. They get kicked out of class for willful defiance, which could be anything from chewing gum to
Unbelievable.
tapping your foot. So I think there's been campaigns to actually change those rules so that willful defiance is no longer just anything a teacher wants it to be, right? Where you can't just get suspended for anything, right? And then, there's other laws that were like, if you show up late, you get a $250 ticket. And, you get
my
slapped with that ticket.
God.
You're in ninth
Really?
grade. This happened in
Oh,
LA, right? But young people organized
Wow.
for years and demanded that law be struck down. And they won.
Right.
Right.
On.
So just to get, and that's there's momentum across the country of, from New York to, other places in the country that are trying to really target school discipline policies to point out that, like, we don't want a punishment culture. We want a restorative justice culture. We want a way for young people to feel welcome in school, a way to address conflict that doesn't include punishment, that includes actually
I know,
resolving
this is the most
conflict.
punitive society. in
Yeah,
the
and
world.
there's actually been some wins in that area.
Wonderful. Tim, we only have about 5 minutes left or less, and
Right.
I want you to give us a little more information
Yeah.
about
I mean, I think
your organization.
Yeah, so Agents for Black Lives, one of the big tests in the past has been the Justice for Akai Gurley case, because, of course, the cop that shot him was Chinese American, Peter Liang.
Oh, I
and
remember
that
New
was
York, yeah.
yeah, in New
Yeah.
York. And to that point, there have been early reports. I haven't seen anything verified, but that Fernando Castillo was shot by an Asian cop in St. Paul, Minnesota, yesterday.
The one that
Mhm,
just
in
happened
Minnesota.
yesterday.
Yep, yesterday.
Yeah.
And so that's early reports. I'm not verified
Still
at all.
trying to confirm
Yeah,
it.
exactly. But either way, it's right there that the Asian American community needs to step up.
Well, I think the other murder was by another black police officer.
right.
So we have to realize that there are all kinds of
Oh, absolutely.
police officers. Police officers of various ethnicities
Right.
have committed murders.
Oh yeah, I mean that's
But,
without
of
question.
course,
It's
but most of them that are killing black people are white. But
yeah, and
there
I mean,
are some who are black.
But I think one of the key points for Agents for Black Lives is that we will not be used as a divide and conquer wedge, because with Peter Liang and Akai Gurley, it became a thing where very powerful conservative Chinese American entities pushed the narrative of one tragedy, two victims. That Peter Liang, the cop that shot Akai Gurley and killed him, was a victim.
Oh.
And I mean, there's all this sort of discussion about, well, are you mad that Peter Liang got convicted for shooting somebody, or you're mad that he got convicted and white cops did not. And those are two different things, whether you think about...
It's apples and oranges.
Exactly.
Really.
I mean, yeah, it's two different arguments to be had, that yes, the system is rigged so that even an Asian American person, is going to be treated differently than a white cop when it comes down to it. But also it's treating that if you kill a black person and you're a cop, then you're going to get off. You should be getting off. And so those are two different arguments, and it's just the hypocrisy there is very apparent. But I mean, that might be coming again with Mr. Castile's murder. And so there was a really interesting thing I saw right before I got in here, and I'll try to wrap this quickly, that people are starting to share this Google document, that you can crowdsource and share, of letters to our parents as Asian Americans about this issue. Because it's very hard to talk to our elders that, have been taught to fear black people. They see them as the ones that are mugging our elders and things like that.
They blanket black people.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that.
Exactly, because of the economic depression and all that leads to.
I've been living in Chinatown
exactly.
for 35
exactly.
years. I know.
Yeah, my mom grew up in the Pings, so. And my dad grew up in the Bayview Hunters Point. But
I'm in the Pigview North.
Exactly. You probably live in the same building as my mom did. But yeah, I mean, it's something that it's a very difficult conversation to have that most people don't have. And so this is a letter. Yeah, this is a Google document that people should check out. And just Google for it, search for it,
and we're out of time. Yeah. Thank you so much, Tim Huey of Asians for Black Lives, Tina Bartolome, my dear friend, of Seoul School of Unity and Liberation, and thank Jackie Perez for board hopping. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. And we have a very special guest coming up on July 21, Favia Kuji Chagalia. It's going to bring us some edutainment. Take care. All power to the people.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.
Free all political prisoners and prisoners of war.
Yep.
Free them all.
Free them all.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yes, it's been such a pleasure. Mm-hmm.